Chapter 15, Melbourne 3, Video 2 of 2. There was the cat lady. One day I knocked on the door of a condo, which opened as I knocked with a creaking sound just like in a bad horror movie. I yelled out, "Hello!" and got an almost inaudible hello back. I was slightly terrified, but I went inside anyway. At first glance, I saw about 10 cats staring back at me. The smell of cat litter hit me like a brick wall. I yelled out hello again and thought about leaving, but hearing a faint voice, I followed it into the bedroom. There I found an elderly lady, frail and ever so tiny. She was laying in her bed, which seemed oversized for her. Just her arms and her head poked out and bits of her flowery nightgown. Her face was pale and her grey curls disheveled. She clearly wasn't well. She was as surprised to see me, a stranger, standing in her bedroom as I was to be there. What on earth was I thinking? However, now I was there, so I thought I might as well ask her if she needed some help. After she explained to me that she had been ill for the week and her daughter was on a vacation in Canberra for another few days, I started doing the only sensible thing I could think of. First, I made the lady some tea, because tea just settles things, and it doesn't seem weird to be in a stranger's house after you have used their tea kettle. Then I set to work and emptied all cat litter boxes around the house. There was one in every room and they were full to the brim. The cats were very friendly. Each was unique. One had an eye missing, the next one a leg, others had no tail or no ears. They had clearly been rescued by this little lady, a rescuer who needed some rescuing herself. I swept up the messes the cats had created, washed the dishes in the sink. After that was done, the house looked and smelled much more inviting. I inspected the refrigerator. Tossing the rotten milk and bread, I was able to cook a hearty broth with everything else that I found. Everyone knows that broth can cure anything. After I had brought the cat lady some broth, she perked up a little. She even sat up and we chatted for a while. She told me about her late husband and about all her kids who had moved away. I went to a corner store to get new bread and milk for her. As the evening drew on, I had to leave, or I would miss my ride back into town. On my way out, I knocked on 2 neighbors' doors. One had bought a contract from me in the morning, the other one hadn't. I asked them to check in on their neighbor until the daughter would be back. Astonished by my request, they agreed, and I left. I had only made 1 sale that day, but I felt rich anyway. Then there was the Swiska family living on my Mornington route. They did not buy a new power contract, but they welcomed me into their family, just like that. On a day that I needed some rescuing, and someone to empty the litter box that was my life. The Swiskas had immigrated to Australia about 2 years earlier. They had a soft spot for me immediately, perhaps because we were all strangers in a strange land together. Malinka, the mother of the family, wanted me to move in and planned to redecorate the guest room for me. Valerie, the daughter, heartily agreed. I never did move in, as touching as their offer was. But their kindness lifted me out of a dark, dreary day, because by then I hated the job and only did it for the money. While selling power contracts, I met countless people who invited me to barbecues, brought me drinks along the street, sat with me on porches, and helped put the world to rights. Nevertheless, I decided that having this job would not make me memories, so I quit. And because I quit, they froze my pay for 3 months. So much for fast money. Whether that was legal or not, I have no idea, but that is what they did. I had to wait 3 months to get what they owed me, something I had not calculated in my plan. As angry as I was also relieved not to have to wear an ugly orange shirt and a tag around my neck any longer. The scrappy job had made me realize that I could be good at whatever I wanted to be. And that is one of the most valuable things I have learned in my life thus far. I enjoyed the newfound freedom by being very lazy for a few days. I think I hardly moved at all. After weeks of walking 10 to 15 miles per day, that was heaven. At the same time, Elke's mother had arrived for 6 weeks. As I was still living in St. Kilda and had an abundance of time, I took it upon myself to show her around a bit. As we walked over the farmer's market, we decided to go on a cabbage diet. Elke's mother had brought with her one of the German women's magazines called Bild der Frau, that I usually laugh about. Amongst its ridiculous beauty tips, it included a story about an amazing diet. Eat nothing but cabbage for 6 weeks and lose a gazillion pounds. Of course, we had to try it, for lack of other things to do. Not that I planned to stay for another 6 weeks, but while I was there, I might as well pass the time. However, every time my brain hears the word diet, my body activates a precautionary mechanism, basically making me eat anything near me. Of course, the cabbage diet cannot work when you're eating 4 pounds of cabbage a day plus other things. After a week of a house smelling like sauerkraut, I had had enough. So I baked 2 kinds of delicious muffins to achieve 2 things. First, to improve the smell of the house, and second, to break the will and resolutions of the inhabitants. I accomplished both. Needless to say, I didn't eat cabbage again, or anything remotely resembling it, until my return to Germany. During my leisure time, I also became a member of the St. Kilda Library. Although I'm an avid book connoisseur, I did not do it for the love of books, but for the love of free internet. As soon as I learned the library offered free internet access, I planned to cut my communication costs by eliminating internet cafes. I hadn't planned on becoming a library member. I just wanted to use the computer. The beautiful librarian behind the counter, however, insisted I sign a membership form. She was only doing her job, so I signed the necessary paperwork and was handed a plastic card. I carry it in my purse to this day. Humans can get an immense sense of belonging by owning a piece of plastic. For that reason, I want to be buried with my wallet. I imagine in 1,000 years, when graves from our society are excavated, they may find me, all dust and bones, but with a shiny, unused St. Kilda library card and probably some sort of credit card. They'll wonder about the strange offerings in my grave. They'll probably suspect those were to pay Charon, the ferryman to Hades. He takes cards now. I had lived at 221B Baker Street for 7 weeks at this point. I had 3 possums in the garden and an uncounted number of mice walking in and out of the kitchen through a hole we had yet to discover. I slept on an old worn-out mattress on the ground next to a bike parked in my room, a room I did not have to share with anyone. It had a shower that was warm for exactly 5 minutes. It was the most luxurious place I had stayed in thus far. However, it was time to leave. But living with Elke made me realize something. She had feminine hygiene products. I was over 4 months into my journey, and I only just realized that I had not needed any of those yet. Which at 24 years of age could only mean one thing: menopause, of course. Surely I had a freakishly early one, a medical wonder. I'd end up in a laboratory and on the cover of Times magazine. I tried to tell myself that, because the more likely answer scared me. Could I be pregnant and not have noticed it? What on earth would I do? Pregnant by Alex, whom I could not imagine as a father, especially after he behaved like a douchebag in my eyes. Sure, he would take responsibility, but that would merely mean some financial support whenever he could give it, which wasn't likely to be very often, and he'd be depressed for the rest of his life because a new life would ruin his. At least, that is how he would have seen it. And what about me? How would this work? Was I to give birth in a tent in the outback somewhere, attended by some wombats and kookaburras? Because I would not go back home, even if all hell broke loose. After carrying this thought around with me for a few days and driving myself crazy, I needed to do a pregnancy test to be certain. What a way to ruin a day. And also, what a way to make 10 minutes last for what felt like 3 months. It was negative. So I was a freak after all, and I didn't mind that. I also didn't worry about it. I mean, what could be better? Of course, a few days after that, Aunt Flo made a glorious return. I can only explain her lack of visits to the change of lifestyle, but who knows? She can be temperamental sometimes. Aunt Flo brings me to a funny side story. I was amazed how many people had an Aunt Flo in Australia, and everybody complained about her visits. It took me a while to realize that only women seemed to have an Aunt Flo, and another while to realize that Aunt Flo wasn't a person at all. Anyhow, I now decided that I needed a car. I had worked freelance for a company in Germany in the few weeks leading up to my departure, while I sorted out my move, my visa, the doctors, and all the paperwork needed. I had asked them to keep hold of half of what I had earned and to wire the money to me whenever I needed it. This was the time. With a car, I could not only go wherever and whenever I wanted, I also had an instant home. One could live in a car quite comfortably, I decided. So the hunt for it began. For the next few days, I went to hostels and backpackers, scanning each bulletin board for cars for sale. I made countless calls, but either the cars had already sold or were driving miracles, that is to say, miraculously still driving. I went to used car dealers, but each and every one seemed so sleazy and just out to screw someone over. Some of those cars barely started. In the end, Elke offered me her car. She didn't need it in St. Kilda. It was an old Ford Falcon. I bought it and named it Malcolm. Malcolm the Falcon. Malcolm just had to go through inspection and registration. In a few days I could be on the road. I went to all the backpackers again. This time it was I who posted a note. Driving north. Who wants to join? I put Elke's landline number underneath, went home and waited. The same night it rang, and I picked up excitedly. It was Jerry. Poor Jerry. He needed to see me, he said. I had not talked to him since we met. I told him I was about to leave Melbourne for good. That was even more reason for him to see me. He wanted to come by the next day. But the next day Jerry did not arrive. Instead, his brother did, telling me that Jerry had hurt his arm at work and was in the ER. I had to stop myself from cheering. Not that I wished him something horrible, but I was glad to have gotten out of that meeting. I would be gone before there was time for him to set another date. I would be more careful when picking up the phone next time. The next few days I spent mending some clothes and preparing myself for traveling, while Malcolm the Falcon underwent a complete checkup. After all, he'd turn 25 next year just like me. At least cars don't get wrinkly. Not that I had any wrinkles then. Then came the day I met Meg. It was also the day I almost did not met Meg. She had responded to my ad and wanted to drive up all the way to Cairns with me. So we decided to meet beforehand to see if we got along. There was an international flower and garden show going on in Melbourne. Meg suggested we meet at the front entrance as she wanted to go in and see the show. At the agreed upon time, however, I was stuck in heavy traffic and nowhere near the show. I had not anticipated its being so popular. Once I got there, there was no parking. I drove past the front entrance about 5 times, just waving out of the window like a complete nutcase. I didn't know who I was waving to, as I had no idea what Meg looked like or if she'd be there. She too did not know who I was, so might not pay attention to a complete stranger waving out of the car frantically while driving past. As a rule of thumb, one should stay clear of weirdos like that anyway. Finally, I found a parking space a few blocks away and walked over to the flower and garden show. I was 2 hours late and had little hope Meg would still be there. But she was, waiting. Meg was German too. I just could not get away from Germans, it seemed. Whether it is a similar heritage or interest, it is easier to get on, and always nice to be understood. Although understanding Meg was a job and a half, she was from Leipzig, like the maternal side of my family, and spoke the broadest Saxonian accent I have ever heard. While my family fled from East Germany to the West just as the wall was built, Meg's family stayed. So she grew up in the East, I in the West. The difference in language was comical, and we had many laughs about it. We decided to travel together. In a few days' time, we'd start our journey heading north up the East Coast. I found 2 more travelers to join us up to Sydney. So Malcolm the Falcon would be full, and I was giddy with excitement.